good students, right? Like Dean's List level students were struggling academically and spiritually. I mean, I sat across the desk from grown men just crying, right? Just breaking down and crying because the workload was it was too unmanageable. And I was told basically they will be fine. Don't bring this up again. There was never an opinion. There was never a suggestion that you could make. You were only there to carry out orders without question.
Well, Anthony, thank you so much for talking with me today and for being here.
Yeah, glad to be here. Thanks for reaching out. Good to be in contact with you again. Good to see you. Hope all is well.
It is. So, how we know each other is from a Bible Institute called Free Gospel Bible Institute. I was a student from 2014 to 2017, graduated there, 3-year school. And then, were you also a student before you were a teacher?
Yes. I attended, would have been fall of '09 through spring of 2012. So I graduated in 2012. Um, and then I returned to teach. You'll remember, of course, my wife and I were faculty during your time as a student. We actually were there until, I believe, spring of 2019, if I'm remembering right. So we spent 4 years as faculty members there.
Okay.
So
Yeah, I know you were there my junior year and senior year, and I didn't realize you stayed until 2019.
Mhm.
Good to know.
Yep.
So, I have not heard your full story before. Of course, I visited you guys in 2019, but I
Mhm.
only heard bits and pieces back then. So, this is my first time hearing your story of your experience there and then just recovering and rebuilding, disentangling faith after that experience. And I'm curious, have you ever publicly shared that story before?
Not publicly, definitely not publicly. A few of my closest friends have kind of got bits and pieces. Certainly not the whole picture. But yes, I don't know that I've shared it in its entirely, really, even privately. So,
So, what motivates you to share now?
um, so I think that's there's a couple things I think that are the stars are kind of aligning. Number one, I think there are more circles available, much like Berean Holiness and some other groups, kind of independently of one another, are forming that are creating like these safer places for people to come forward and talk about this. It's not as recovering from hyper fundamentalism, as you know, and I learned, is not as exclusive as it seems. So even uh, friendships I've made that had nothing to do with like the holiness movement. They were raised in different backgrounds, so there's just kind of some things coming together that's uh, really just creating the perfect environment for myself to kind of open up about some things and that and um, I really believe what's kind of given me, I feel like, a little more freedom to speak about these things is the true healing process that's taken place in my life, specifically over the past year. So this was almost 6 years ago that, let's see, we resigned in 2019. So that would have been over 6 years ago. And it was really only within the last year or so that I feel like God's really helped me to reach a place of healing, like definitive healing, to be able to speak without all of the the bitterness and the anger and all the emotions that come with it, right? They're still there, you know what I'm saying? Like we're emotional beings and such, um but like there's just a definitive line of healing that I feel like my soul has crossed, and so thus I feel kind of the freedom to speak about some of these things.
Yeah, and I'm so glad you are because you mentioned some of the groups that are starting to form to help people disentangle and rebuild faith after experiences or growing up in hyperfundamentalism. And when you say that, of course, I think about the deconstruction movement and how prominent that has been, especially the last 5 years. I'm sure you've heard of it. But when I say deconstruction movement, I'm referring to most of them they're not Christians. The great majority are not Christians. Some will claim progressive Christianity, but basically they're speaking up to try to get people to leave Christianity entirely. And a lot of
Right.
those people grew up in abusive environments and then decided that that's what Christianity is and they want nothing to do with it. And now they're very, very prominent online, some with millions of followers, telling people to leave the faith. And so if
Yeah.
Christians don't speak up and say, hey, no, what we experienced is not Christianity, that was abuse, then we're just going to see more and more people leave the faith entirely and follow those who are pushing them away from Christ.
Yes. Yes, certainly. This generation of millennials and Gen Zers, there's a lot of interesting studies. It is the most spiritual generation in a long time. Um, so basically, I believe that's a product of the failure of secularism. There's just a lot going on. There's a shift away from the pragmatic, more towards the spiritual. That doesn't necessarily mean Christian, but just spiritual in general. And so it's a really short bridge from, a religious Bible vein school of thought into something else, that can scratch the itch of the need for spirituality that we have, that many of our peers and younger than us kind of feel the need for in this generation. So it's a very slippery slope because they can just slide away from Christianity to something else to take its place.
Yeah, and
So
I've seen
very.
that over and over again, including people who leave, even graduate Free Gospel Bible Institute, and was pretty amazed within a couple years how many people just left the faith entirely, not
Mm.
even Christians anymore. And as I talked to some of those people who made that decision, I was amazed how many basically trace back, yeah, I'm not a Christian because what I saw, what I experienced, and if that's what it is, I want nothing to do with it. And then just went the total other direction, and for some ended up making destructive life choices. And I would love to see more people pursue healing and more people find healing in Christ and in true Christianity instead of just turning away from all of it.
Yes.
But of course, as we have this conversation, the reason why it hasn't been had so many times, and why so many people have been silenced or felt obligated to not share their story for years and years, because so much of this has gone on for 2 decades and people just haven't spoken out. And I think a lot of that comes back to a twisted teaching on gossip. And gossip, Thomas Peretic, the school president, has 2 series of teachings that we're going to keep referencing as we talk about all this. One is called Lessons in Loyalty, and it's about being loyal to the pastor, basically no matter what. And the second series, and both of these were sold online for many years. And the second one is Taming the Tongue, and it's about gossip. But unfortunately, the way gossip was taught, I think I want to use the word weaponized to keep people from ever speaking up about anything that happened to them. And actually, as Rebecca Pruitt, who was faculty there for many years, you would know Rebecca. I believe she overlapped with both of us.
Yes.
As she's spoken up about her experiences, I've seen so many comments responding to her that I know it's coming straight from these teachings that we had about gossip.
To respond to those comments regarding certainly Becky Pruitt's experience, who, knowing what I know, she has to have been that had to have been amongst, if not the worst experience that anybody has ever had coming out of free gospel. And so it's very hard to have the type of conversation that people are going to listen to and be receptive to, trying to be polite, but also be um, really forthcoming and straightforward. Okay, so to not pull any punches. Um, if you've not been there, you just don't know. Okay, um, and a lot of these people, either whether they didn't go to the school at all, okay, people who certainly have not attended there even as students, they don't have a foot to stand on as far as experientially, because they've not been a part of it. They don't know the culture. They don't know the air that's there. Even I'd even say, as far as like students, being a student is worlds different than being a faculty member there, right? So still same universe, but different planets entirely. Certainly somebody who's been there for the better part of a decade, right? Like Becky. Um, yeah, attend the school for a semester or a year or even 3 years, and then to pretend like you relate to these deeper experiences. Somebody who's been there 5+ years, close to a decade. Just the proximity plus the time makes them so much more susceptible to manipulation and the abuse that is just the accepted norm there. So even if it's not necessarily horribly intense, it's just it's like a burr in the saddle. I mean, it never goes away, and it's just really really destructive at the least, right? And I have several friends who have experienced a lot worse than the least of it, right? So that's what I would say to those people: is if you have not walked a mile in the shoes of the person who's speaking up about these things, you don't have anything to say because you don't know.
Hmm. Yeah, and just it's wild to me that people would just say basically what those comments are saying is let abusers abuse. And some of the other comments have been even more blatant, just saying God will, if he's wrong, then God will remove him. We don't need to touch God's anointed. And it's wild, and it's destroying their movement from the inside out because there's no accountability for abusers. And unfortunately, when any movement sets up that kind of protection for their leaders, then they are going to attract abusive people because the abusive people will know if they get into one of those high positions, they're untouchable.
Yes, that is a prominent problem. Not even really just with the school. I think the school is definitely a place where that is intensified. Right? It's kind of its own little world. It's very cultish in nature. It's basically just a commune, right? So it's out there in Pennsylvania. We're not in the Bible Belt. There's not a church on every corner. There's not fellowshipping pastors, really. And so it really creates this perfectly isolated place and geography for this stuff to thrive, right? And I think it's just dangerous for any church or organization or Christian entity to have anybody in a place of absolute power. One man with no check, no balance, because even the best pastor in the world is still human, and he will be subject to error. He will be subject to misinterpretation of scripture. And it is imperative, not just for the soul of the pastor, but for the souls of those that sit under that ministry. Um, it is imperative that that leader have extremely weighty accountability, all the more in a place of leadership. And you and I both know that that is something that not only is it lacking, it's just non-existent. um, the biggest, I think, um, what has been my biggest problem with the school isn't even necessarily uh, the administration personally, because everybody that knows um, uh, the president and his wife, that they just know that these people are they're not friendly, they're not kind, they're very difficult to work with. Um, Everybody knows that, and I knew that coming into uh, my role as a faculty member there. So everybody knows this. So the problem really for me wasn't so much um, the administration; it was the lack of accountability from the board members, the adjacent movement, these other pastors who are equals and peers to Thomas Paretic. None of them seem to have, frankly, the guts to say anything or hold him accountable for anything that's been said or done. And so that is really where I think a lot of these problems come from, because there's no accountability. Anybody who has offered or challenged anything that's said is just quickly blacklisted. They're isolated. They're kind of just pushed to the edge until they resign or move on, and or worse, right? So it's you know um, the administration, the president, his wife, like they've just kind of always been the same people. Really, my biggest disappointment is with the board members and the leaders and the pastors of the churches that affiliate with Free Gospel. They have missed the mark. They have had every opportunity to step up and just say something. I remember there was a time where I didn't even necessarily I didn't agree with the thought that the administration needed to be removed or dismissed. I would say corrected would have been a better way to do it. I think there should have been some meetings where, uh, this president was spoken with and held to a certain accountability. Boundaries were drawn. I think apologies should be made. I mean, deep, sincere apologies for egregious mistakes that have taken place. But none of that has happened, right? So,
So what that means is, again, going back to all the Facebook comments that Rebecca Pruitt has received, it's been like, "Hey, Becky, this is not the way to handle this. You need to go to him in person. This should not be public." But what it sounds like from you and what I've heard from a million others is that he has been confronted face to face, and he has, like, people have gone to the board, and nothing has ever been done for 24 years, which leaves no other option but to make some of this public. Does that sound correct?
yes, yes. I think that's the biblical pattern. For offenses and confrontation is go to the person directly. If that doesn't work, bring a witness. If that doesn't work, bring it before the church. Right. So that's a biblical pattern for reconciliation, for accountability, for forgiveness, which is the end goal. Right. At the end of the day, um, as difficult as some of these things have been, that's what a lot of us are on the journey towards, is ultimately forgiveness and healing, and the restoration of God's favor and blessing on our ministries. I would even say on the ministry of the school, right? That should be the end goal. Um, so yeah, it's a sad reality. To bring it before the church has been really difficult. So that pattern has been really difficult to follow, because the church, right, this movement has bought into the falsities of they've bought the lies that nothing's really going on, right? Like the wool is over their eyes, and in their minds, they're God's righteous warriors, and they're going on for God. And this is, to them, it's just persecution
Mm-hmm.
sometimes. So it's really hard to speak up about these things, because they're taken very personally. We almost make martyrs out of them. We have to be careful. Like, um, I've tried to be careful in not speaking derogatorily, unnecessarily, or angrily, or with a lot of emotion, because when you do that, you turn these people into martyrs, and it almost makes them feel validated in their position. So it's just not good.
Right. And when you talk about accountability, I also think of the verse in 1 Timothy 5:19 and 20. Against an elder receive not an accusation, but before 2 or 3 witnesses. Them that sin rebuke before all, that others may fear. And so it almost comes across like the standard of accountability for an elder, for someone in church leadership, is higher, because in the context of elders, the Bible just says, them that sin, elders that sin, rebuke before all. And I think that's because their ministry has been public. So especially if they're teaching falsely or treating people in a terrible way in the name of Christ, it seems to be that the Bible is saying, rebuke them before all.
Yes, they should be held to a higher level of accountability. Um, Much it was said by one of my she's quickly becoming one of my favorite speakers, Christine Kane. She's pretty mainstream. Um, she said recently in probably a podcast or something I listened to that she was a guest on. She was advised, she grew up in kind of like Pentecostal circles, certainly not hyper fundamentals like we were. Pardon me. I worked for 48 hours. I got off a 48-hour shift this morning, so I got shift brain. Um, uh, she was advised really early on in her ministry as it began to take off and have success by an elder. She said, "You better fall on your face uh, and beg that God give you the right amount of influence. Be very, very careful seeking influence because the amount of people that you can help is the same amount of number of people that you can hurt, right? So even very well-meaning, successful ministers are human. They're going to drop the ball, they're going to miss the mark, and they're going to hurt people. And I don't think perfection is ever the goal. That's never going to happen. But I believe in that case, we have a chance to show the gospel, right? And if through our ministry we offend someone, we hurt someone, that's a beautiful opportunity to show the grace and forgiveness that Christ gives to us through the message of the gospel, right? And from there, we reconcile, we grow, the relationships become stronger. um, in a marriage, if you have a disagreement or a spat with your spouse, the ideal model is that you communicate through that, you get to know each other, you forgive, and then you move on um, with a stronger bond, right? So anyway, the influence, we have to be very, very careful with our influence as ministers, because ministers should be held to a higher standard of accountability. And it's really just a childish approach. It's kind of ironic. All this teaching about gossip and loyalty, is like there's an extreme accountability. Um, I mean, to the tax about as far as followers, right? Like, well, we expect you to be um, your loyalty to be completely bulletproof. Don't ask any questions. Uh, don't speak about anything behind closed doors, in private, in confidence. We expect this level of perfection out of you. But then when the coin is flipped, there's almost no accountability at all. So it's really kind of childish.
I agree. So tell me more about how you came to FigB. Why did you choose FigB? What was your first impressions when you showed up? Tell me about it from the student's perspective and anything leading up to that that's relevant.
Certainly. So I'm gonna try to make this a little quicker because I'm a talker. I love talking. I go a long time without talking to my friends, and so when I get together with them, I can talk for a long time. But uh, for sake of condensing in time, I felt the call to preach when I was just young teenager. And however people want to take that statement, right? Felt the call to preach. I just knew I was raised in church. Uh, I knew I wanted to do something for God. I just felt like He had done some really, really cool things in my life. I was just excited. And to me, the ultimate form of surrender was to become a preacher and just basically answer the call of God wherever He would lead me, right? Um, Now, my pastor at the time was actually a graduate from years before from uh, Free Gospel, and he actually advised me to make plans to go when I graduated high school. So I was excited about that. I mean, I was a groupie. I was dedicated, man. I was a fan. I mean, I had the pamphlets. If they came to youth camps and handed out their pamphlets and CDs, I mean, I had collections of them. I could not wait to go to Bible school. So immediately after I graduated high school, went uh, fall of '09 to become a student there, and that's kind of a mixed bag. I was really excited for the opportunity. Um, I was scared to death. Just I was. just a really backward guy. Homeschooled, socially awkward, not the greatest academically, so I knew it would be a challenge. Not knowing what to expect, and then there was like a level of um, relief because I was leaving a kind of a less than ideal home situation, so I was really relieved to kind of get away from that, get out on my own, um, and I was hoping to find some healing from that. But first impressions were fantastic. I mean, I made really good friends just right off the rip. I was like, man, this is awesome. We're basically just living together. We get to hang out all the time. We pray and we read and we study and just it was just I was on cloud nine as far as first impressions as a student. Um, that's a first impression. I quickly realized that I quickly became overwhelmed with like the workload and things that were being asked of us. It was culture shock. I just came from a simple, slow farm life, right? Like I was just a farm boy, and we lived life very slow, very simply. And so it was culture shock. So it was just a lot of taking in, but I felt like uh, I did okay. I adjusted and moved on. I went the entire 3 years, right? There's many of the students don't even finish the 3 years, but stayed committed and uh, yeah. I was honestly sad to leave when I graduated, in a way.
Yeah, I can relate to that. And I remember what I was going to miss the most was the people. Like, I've just gotten so close to all these people, and then to know I'm not coming back. We're not all coming back next fall. This is it. We don't know how much we'll even keep in touch after, all becoming so close. So yeah, I can relate to the mixed feelings. So, tell me a story about how you became faculty. I'm curious if you know why you're asked and how that went, and how did you feel about becoming faculty?
Yeah, I'll tell you. I believe I know why we became faculty. Number one, I had expressed probably about a year or so after I graduated, my wife and I returned just to visit the school. I believe we attended a graduation, maybe my sister-in-law's graduation. Um, but in any case, I actually expressed to Thomas Breddick an interest in coming back to help at the school because, like I said, I was sad to leave the place. I mean, it was super impactful. It was a huge part of my life. And for the first year or so of my wife and I's marriage, it was just kind of, it was pretty quiet. Looking back now, I kind of wish I would have appreciated that time a little more, but um, we just didn't put down a lot of roots, right? We rented an apartment. Um, that's where we uh, spent the majority of the first year of our marriage. I didn't pursue another degree in some different field. I really didn't take on a career path because in my mind I was like, well, I went to Bible school. It's going to be only a matter of time before I receive a call and I'm shipping off to Timbuktu to go pastor church or be a youth pastor somewhere. So my mind was just really my motive was just to have a singleness of heart towards the ministry. I didn't want to have any other commitments besides Lord. Uh, I want to be in the ministry and I want to do Your will for my life. And so we were just kind of sitting on go. Um, and so I expressed the interest in coming to help out at the school. Uh, Not too long after that, um, well, let's see. Uh, so a couple years went by. I'd kind of given up any thought of going back there. Still nothing really as far as like ministry opportunity. I just stayed working my job. We had uh, our first child, my oldest son, during that time, and a couple years later, actually, it's crazy to think about because it's almost 10 years ago to the day that I received the call from the FGBI administration to get the invitation to come back as a faculty member. And I know why. Besides the fact that I'd offered to come and help out, um, I'm sure anybody that knows anything about the school notices the trend of hiring young, fresh families or single people that staff. That's the majority of their faculty staff. It's just young married or unmarried. It's a young staff, right? And I believe one of the motives behind that is just they're just easier to manipulate. They're so eager, most of them are just eager to please, right? We're hungry for that validation. Like, I need an older man or woman of God to just kind of validate me and tell me, like, yeah, you're doing good things for the kingdom of God. God's anointing is on your life. It's like that culture and that church world, is like that is your identity, is doing things for God, and which is not the gospel, right? We're created to be with God, not to do things for God. That's a lesson I kind of learned the hard way down through the years. But that's the main motive, is like you want to do something for God and you need that to be validated. Um, and so they're usually on the prowl for younger faculty members. They're easier to manipulate. You don't have to pay them as much. Um, yeah, and it's a revolving door, right? I think the average is 2 or 3 years per faculty member. It's just a revolving door. So we were asked because we were young, and um, yeah, I think they were scrambling because of that high turnover rate. They had other faculty resign, and they just needed to fill slots for the fall. So I was there. We were, and I said yes pretty quickly, because in my mind I was like, oh, this is the greatest thing that ever happened. I got to go do something for God over at, teach at the Bible school.
Yeah, so when you say that, I think about the Figbee's homepage. It's a letter from Thomas Peredick to prospective students. And he says, he's talking about what you will experience at Figbee. And he says, over a period of 3 years, qualified teachers pour out a lifetime of knowledge and anointing into the student body. But the whole lifetime of experience part is kind of ironic when you realize that most of the students are, 20, or most of the teachers are 25, 30. How old were you at the time that you went, if you don't mind me asking?
I gotta do my math. Math is hard. So I believe 20, 24 or 25
That
when I
sounds about
came back.
right. That
Yep.
sounds about right. Because you told our class, and we were like, oh, cool. You're only like 4 years older than us. So that means we can act
Yeah.
up, right?
Yeah. And that's an interesting dynamic, because you really, and looking back now, oh, um, there's the old Disney Tarzan movie. Old Phil Collins sings a song about. He says, "In learning you will teach, and in teaching you will learn." That was kind of my mantra through my teaching experience. Was real. I just grew along with you guys. It's kind of like with my firstborn son. God bless his heart. I was 22 years old maybe when he was born, so he and I are just kind of growing up together. That's kind of how it was with my students. But it, but yeah, not to get ahead of myself because I
Yeah.
got more comments about that later. But
So you have 4 years of life experience on us, and some of us were mid-20s. Some of the students were mid-20s, but it's just kind of funny for me to think of, like, you're pouring those 4 years of experience into us.
yeah, and it's funny because most of our ministry experience wasn't necessarily like real world ministry. It was the school. It was the machinations of Figbee was our ministry experience. So I think they do well. The teachers who have been through the process. Obviously, those are the ones who tend to uh, relate the best to the students. So it's not all bad, but yeah, it's young, fresh victims is how they love to staff their faculty. So
Well, and it wouldn't be so bad if there was a balance, right? Like if there was a mix of young and older. But I think about, we just hired, someone for Bree and Holiness that's quite a bit older than me, and the experience that he brings from church planning in Japan for a decade and this pastoral experience, and he has so much that I'm learning from and that I'm excited to share with people. And so when I think about it from an employer's perspective, if I was the employer at FGBI, it seems like it would be incredible to hire a minister who maybe he's retired, maybe he's in his 60s and he's got 40 years of ministry experience to share with the students. That would be incredible. You'd think, but you never see it. It's not that, you know, it's not that it's just not all the faculty are older with a lot of experience, but it's just never, almost never.
Yeah, almost none.
Yeah. So what roles did you serve in? What did you do at Free Gospel?
So of course, I was an instructor, um, and that load alone was pretty quickly. Oh, what's the word? It quickly grew over me, right? Like they made me responsible for just a couple classes as like an introductory period. I believe the first semester that doubled or tripled by the following semester, right? So instructor, of course, lots of hours teaching. I was also the assistant dean of men. Eventually became the head dean of men. Um, I mean, um, performed ground maintenance of all types, groundskeeping, miscellaneous tasks, delivery driver, ministry leader, um, travel, a driver, right? It was just, there was always, you never really knew what you were going to get into, but you were supposed to be a teacher, but there was just a network of things that were silently expected of you, right? And if you ever challenged any of them or tried to draw boundaries, of course, that didn't ever work out. But yeah, there was a network of things to always something to take care of.
Yeah, I was looking through my old yearbooks, and if you can see, that's you guys. Massive
Oh my
big
goodness.
cover picture of you. This was my junior year. Um, and yeah, it has some of your roles and stuff that you're teaching. And then my senior year, I looked you up in there as well. Um, Hopefully you were still liked, but your picture got smaller.
Oh man,
And
yeah.
yeah, and it says in this one though, it says you taught business math, fiscal management, poetry and wisdom, tabernacle, life and teachings of Jesus, and Hebrews. So
Mhm.
quite a bit. Um,
Yeah.
and your education credentials for teaching there, what were they?
Yeah, no credentials to speak of. I had a FIGB diploma, um, and a willing heart. That was my credentials. So
So your quote
I'm kind of scared
in
what this is going to be.
it says that your expectations of yourself were raised. It says, and then goes on, in many instances, I was stretched beyond my comfort zone and what I felt was within my capability. Yet God provides strength. So it had a spiritual ending there. But you talk about how you were stretched beyond your comfort zone and beyond what you thought was capable, what you're capable of, and that was your yearbook quote. Um,
Hmm.
so I'm curious just a little bit more about what was the workload like? What were the expectations like?
Oh man, I'm trying to remember writing that quote. For all I know, somebody might have made that up and put it in the yearbook because they had a deadline put on them by Thomas Reddick to get the yearbook together, and it was usually kind of hectic trying to get everything finalized for that and printed. But I'm really trying to remember what might have been going through my mind at that time. Um, I don't actually remember writing that. Uh, but as far as the workload and the expectation, basically, without putting a lot of specifics on it, which I know people look for, but if people want to have a conversation with me, feel free to contact me directly with any questions. But basically, above and beyond was just that was the push constantly, right? It's a very Figby and the Holiness movement. They're very works based, performance based religion, which is extremely just putridly toxic, in my opinion. Biblically speaking, it's wrong. So there was this constant push that you have to go above and beyond, and if and eventually. when you live under that for so long, above and beyond becomes bare minimum. Well, that in itself is just a recipe for disaster and burnout as it is, right? Like, we were not made to, as far as our relationship with Christ, it doesn't, the foundation of it is not our performance. Certainly on subsidiary or tertiary issues, like not even relevant to the gospel, right? Whether, and a lot of it's so superficial performance at that, right? So how well can you sing? How well can you preach, right? What is your tone? What is your voice fluctuation? How loud can you do that preacher voice? You know what I'm saying? And I tried, like I subscribed to it, and I was trying. It's funny, I was never good at it. Um, I looking back now, I guess I understand why. Um, but it's just so superficial. Just this performance based, uh, not even gospel. You are treated with respect, not as a human, not as a person, but based on your performance, right? How early are you to certain things? Are you ever late? Obviously, habitually late is kind of an issue, but I mean, like once a year, if you were late for anything, I mean, you were on the chopping block. You know how it is. Um, yeah, so it was the workload was just this constant striving of going above and beyond, becoming the bare minimum, and trying to do so without complaining, without saying anything negative about the administration, the leadership, the system of the school, without asking for some boundaries or a lighter load during certain seasons. Um, my second born, Caden, you remember Caden? He was born during our time there at school. I think I spent a whole 24 hours maybe at home with my wife and the baby before I had to go back to the system that is free gospel. I mean, it was just, there was no allowance for bonding time with my family and my new baby. It was just work, 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 work from sun up to sundown. You couldn't stop. There was no autonomy. You were just a part of the system, you know?
Mm. So, practically speaking, if you actually look at how many hours you were regularly working, what did that look like? Because Becky, for example, mentioned that she technically only worked 5 or 6 days a week, but in her off day, there were so many expectations of her. She worked that full day too. So I'm just curious, how much do you think that you were working on average?
Let's see here. So, most days it was generally speaking just sun up to sundown. Um, it's really hard to put a number on the hours because there wasn't a set. You never really clocked out. You were never off limits. So there's this constant hyper availability, right? So I taught, let's say, you know, at one point I think the schedule was usually 4 classes a day, four periods a day, two before lunch, two after lunch, or something to do that. Sometimes more. Um, I didn't necessarily teach every hour, but any hour that I wasn't teaching, it was kind of a frantic like rush back to the office to print something off or to kind of brush up and read on something as I was building the curriculum uh, to fit my own teaching style and just really study my own material and stuff like that, and accumulate something good to give to my students. It was just uh, of course, we had our prayer meetings in the morning, so we were expected to be at our prayers, faculty meetings. There was the classes, the chapels, uh, afternoon classes, and then inevitably there was just something that needed done. Somebody had to go pick up some donated food. Sometimes it was just down the road at a local Giant Eagle. Sometimes it was 3 hours away at a food bank. Um, Sometimes a pipe busted, or in the wintertime the furnace needed tending because there was this giant heating system put in that was run uh, we used the manpower of the students to saved a lot of money by using free labor to heat all the buildings. And make things more efficient, and on I could go. But basically, you just had to be, there was no shut off, right? It was like you had to be available all the time to do whatever. So hard to put hours on, but just the anxiety that came from that hyper
Yeah.
availability.
Yeah, so you didn't have 1 or 2 days a week that they were just all yours. It sounds like even on your off days you could be contacted or you could just be studying and prepping for all the classes you were teaching.
Yes, they did give us 1 day off a week. Now, during my time, I came with a family, right? So that was kind of built in. They were a lot more respectful of the families than say the singles. I will say that, and that's not to say that it was good for the families. I'm saying that was bad for the single people because they were taken
Mhm.
advantage of. And so Becky, unfortunately, was kind of grandmothered into that system where she was just expected, right? She moved, transitioned from single to married, and then they just had the same expectations, I guess, out of her or worse. Um, so they gave us the 1 day off a week, but yeah, sometimes that was sacrificed to ministry trips, or like I usually would spend the day trying to catch up on stuff, right? More teaching materials, spending time with my family, trying to be a good husband, be a good father, be present, and all that kind of stuff. So,
Yeah. So for all the sun up to sundown days that you work, in a normal job you would have overtime and a half for all the hours that went above. So at least there would be very good money attached to working so much in hyper availability and being on call at all times, at least 6 days a week. So what was the compensation like for Figby for this workload and expectations?
oh my goodness. So I'll put a number. I remember we got paid. Um, I'm going to say initially we began, I think, $125 a week is what we got paid. Now that increased incrementally over time. Um, you know, it's kind of like how the government takes your money, and then gives it back to you later on, and then they act like they're doing you a favor. Well, yeah, so there was periodically there was raises, and they acted like they were doing us kind of a favor. They were so pleased with our performance, so they threw us another $25 a week, kind of thing. Yeah, it was. I certainly did not do it for the money. It's pitiful.
So at 150 a week, even if you got paid for 52 weeks, I just did the math, that would be $7,800 a year. A annual salary would be less than $8,000 a year.
Yep, yep. I think we did a tax refund 1 year. I think it was about 10 grand because I'd come up with some other, like, got jobs during the summer or something like that. Yeah, it was tough.
Yeah. Wow. But that's definitely severe poverty level. So, and of course, what I've heard from people is like, well, it's okay that they only pay an annual salary of $7,000 for a family because, meanwhile, that's like normal for a month for a lot of families. But I've been, or if not more, but anyways, yeah. So the response to that is basically, well, that's fine because that's basically just their extra spending money. The school's taking care of all their needs, all their housing, all their food. That's basically what I've been told. But I'm curious, do you feel like the school, quote unquote, taking care of all your needs compensated for only getting a $7,000 annual salary?
Not at all. In fact, that is the biggest frustration. I would say the biggest hurdle for me to jump over. It's become a spiritual issue for me since then. Um, we lived in poverty until very, very recently, and that was the biggest struggle of my life. Um, when I'm trying not to get too much ahead of myself here. Um, the financial issue in and of itself really just it ruined us a lot, and that's probably what makes it the most difficult to not take a lot of this stuff personally. Uh, in my association with other holy members of the holiness movement, pastors and leadership and such, um, because I was never really worried about the money. because I felt like there was this element of, it's kind of ingrained into us of, trust God, He's going to meet the need. Kind of felt this security blanket of I knew that there was a network. If anything ever happened to me and my family there at the school, well, we would be taken care of because people would take us in, they would let us preach, they would give us places to stay, all that kind of stuff. Um, but yeah, basically all we did was dig ourselves into a pit financially, with almost no resources to get out. Um, and there really seemed to be a lack of equality, I guess is the word, amongst the other, because some of the other faculty members, for some reason, I don't know where it came from. Maybe they had other sponsors. I don't know. All I do know is that other faculty members were buying new vehicles. They bought recreational vehicles, rental properties. Um, uh, I was actually approached by Thomas Predick to come help him do renovations on a cabin that he had bought in Canada, some vacation home or something. That's not to say it was elaborate or anything like that. And that's, by all means, that's his money. I'm not saying that's right or wrong. I'm just saying, while we were struggling to pay our bills, which were almost non-existent, right? We didn't have an electric bill, we didn't have utilities, all that stuff. We had like a phone bill, and we had to get a car while we were there, so we had a car payment. But I mean, just barely getting by, while others are, they seem to be coming up with funds somewhere. Some of the other faculty members were enrolled in online courses, attaining master's degrees and bachelor's degrees and everything. And I don't know where the funds came from, because none of those opportunities were really made for myself or my family. Um, Not that it was something I really just actively pushed for, but all I can say is that there seemed to be opportunities afforded to other faculty members that were not afforded to some others, myself included. So it was just a deep, deep pit of financial destitution, that, by God's grace, only recently have we kind of crested the hill of.
Yeah. Well, when you're saying maybe you made 10,000 a year, there's no, because if the salary was different, if you're like, we didn't make much, we only made 50,000, and that people say that, like, that's a reasonable thing to say. But people who are making 50 or 60 or 70,000 and saying, yeah, I don't know how we could afford extra education or extra vehicles or extra vacation homes or rental properties. Someone might say, well, you just have to budget. You just have to rework your finances. Let me help you. But when you're only making $10,000 a year, there is no amount of budgeting, of reworking your finances, of reallocating, of saving that could make you be able to afford, extra vehicles and this kind of stuff. So it wasn't your fault, is what I'm saying. There's no way. The only way other faculty could have had some of the finer things would be if they're getting money from other places. And you mentioned working on the cabin home, and so I've had quite a few students, including myself, talk about how they were required to work on rental properties of faculty members, particularly the president. I don't want to throw anyone else under the bus. There wasn't like everyone had rental properties,
Right.
but he had rental properties, and there were students that have told me they worked on them for free. I worked on them for free. And to be fair, I'll just caveat the one time that I was in the basement of one of those rental properties scooping out dog doo from a dog that had been trapped in a basement. To be fair, it was technically volunteer, because they told me, well, you can do these really unpleasant tasks at the school and we'll force you to do those, or we'll let you out of those if you come work on our rental properties for free. So I'm just curious if you or another person that saw any of that exploitation of labor from faculty or students.
Oh, certainly. Uh, my wife, in fact, has a couple stories from when she was a student. Some ladies' work day. I believe her and maybe another student were tasked with cleaning the predic's personal garage, and just that frequently happened. I mean, I myself have been up there with some of the guys moving predic's personal property. Um, I've been to a couple of his other rental properties, not necessarily working for free. I was on salary as a staff member, right? But I certainly wasn't getting paid a tradesman's rate or certainly anything extra, working for more than it was worth for sure. So yeah, there's no way to know everything, all the instances where that took place.
Yeah, I agree. And so I'm thinking about all this, and I'm also thinking about what this spiritual manipulation, because I know, again, I'm speaking from a student's perspective. It was very much, hey, we do everything willingly and cheerfully, and Jesus used me, and you're asked to do something, do it right away with the right spirit. Even if it was, hey, come organize our personal garage, you're supposed to do it right away with the right spirit. So very spiritual. But I'm thinking about when it comes to you're trying to provide for a family of 3 and then 4 on a salary of 10,000 or less a year. Was there it just makes me wonder, like, what would motivate a breadwinner to take a salary that low, knowing that you're not going to be able to get other jobs, to go above and beyond that. I'm wondering, what was there, was it a spiritual reason, or pressure, or dare I say manipulation, that motivated you to work for that little and try to provide for your family for that little?
Yes, but I wouldn't blame free gospel for that. I would blame kind of the holiness movement, I guess, proper. Um, I'm not a preacher's son or a pastor's son. I basically was a no name, um, come from, like I said, like kind of a less than ideal home situation, and trying to beat all the statistics of, being a child of divorce and all this kind of stuff. My wife as well came from a broken home. Uh, so we were really out there just trying to beat the statistics, and seeing as how we came from such a kind of shameful position, um, it was very hard for us to feel like there would ever be any opportunity at all, right? So we were kind of just begging for the crumbs that fell from the table, ministerially speaking. So there was no church of 300 people calling us to come be the lead pastor. There was no youth positions, youth leader positions. Basically, nothing was coming available to us, and so both of us kind of felt like, probably being manipulated by the previous teachings, um, just improper teachings that we received in the past, that we just had to, do something for God, and that had to be strictly vocational ministry, right? Otherwise, we had no value. There was no merit to our existence. There was no value. We were out of the will of God. We were drifting. We were backsliding if we weren't doing something in full time ministry, right? And that was kind of the expectation, uh, as a FIGB graduate. Like, you are expected to be. In fact, some of those things are alluded to frequently in Tom Perettich's preaching and teaching. Is that if you're not a pastor by the time you graduate, you have failed somewhere. Like, you didn't fast enough, you didn't pray enough, you're not spiritual enough. And so it's just this horrible, again, that performance based religion and teaching and way of living really influenced us to believe that, like, uh, on one hand, I was really honored to be asked to come there. On the other hand, uh, I felt like there was no other opportunity that would come to us. And so, since this is kind of the armpit of ministerial jobs as far as it goes, I felt like that was just kind of like what we were called to do, because in some ways we really didn't deserve a whole lot better, because we weren't the most talented, or we weren't the best looking people, and I wasn't the best preacher, and my daddy and granddaddy wasn't a preacher. So um, yeah, I think the motive behind that was fear based, right? You're going to miss out on the will of God if you're not in full time ministry. You won't go to heaven if you don't do God's will on your life.
Yeah. I really appreciate you saying that, because there's so many people who reached out to us or talked to us that their theology set them up for poverty, in the sense that their theology was, if you are going to be favored by God and accepted by God, you must be in vocational ministry, and it must be in our tiny movement. And there's several movements that do this, not even just the one we're from. But you must be in our movement, and then that movement's so small. There's too many preachers for the amount of churches that can support a preacher, and so it sets them up for failure. But then when they experience that failure, they feel like a spiritual failure, and that like God's upset with them.
Yep. And I would say I kind of feel like maybe I kind of need to take a little path here. I would say to anybody that might listen to this that feels that way, number one, the world in the church is so much bigger than whatever little echo chamber of religion that you feel is your whole world. It's a drop in the bucket compared to the kingdom of God, right? And there's so much to do in the kingdom of God. Um, uh, so don't feel trapped where you are, because God will put you in contact with the right people. If you feel like you're caged and you're serving from a place of fear or manipulation, like I can tell you this much, that's not God's will for you. I don't know what it is, but I know it's not that, right? So uh, God will God will keep you as long as you just hold His hand and trust in His plan for your life. And you might upset some people, but they're not the ones who hold the universe together, right? So if you feel like you're in an echo chamber and it doesn't feel like home, it's probably because it's not. And don't be afraid to step out of that. I'm not saying dive off the deep end of bad theology or living a, I still believe in holiness, right? I hate that they've kind of taken that word and spoiled it, but I still believe in the holiness of God. So live a quiet, holy life by all means, but like, don't be afraid to challenge the echo chamber that you're living in if it's really not delivering the full gospel. Um, and don't be afraid. I've been away from vocational ministry really ever since I left the school. And now I'm in the place where, I mean, gosh, um, uh, I serve the citizens of my city. Um, like I said, we're fire and EMS, right? With Springfield Fire. Um, so it's not like running into burning buildings every day. I mean, I've done it a time or two, but it's more so like on our ambulance calls, right? We go on sick people, we go on mentally disturbed people. So I'm able to minister to them. It's a ministry of healing of sorts, right? It's medicinal, which is no less, that's not it's not necessarily miraculous, like in the charismatic sense of the word. But it's just a way that God uses us, me and my coworkers. Uh, and wherever you find yourself, if you're in a place other than vocational ministry, do it unto God. And there is no ministry position that makes somebody a better person or brings more of the favor of God on their life. Just serve God where you're at.
Absolutely. So I want to ask you a question about what it was like serving in the leadership model that is at FGBI. And to help our audience understand the leadership model, I'm just going to throw out a few quotes that are taught by Thomas Predick at the school. He teaches that there is a head pastor, a head man of God, and everyone else is a servant to that man. And one place where it's kind of summed up is he says, until God promotes you to be the head, you'll occupy the position of an assistant, which in other places is also referred to as the servant. He talks about how you have to train people to fit your needs. And then when he's teaching people how to be a good assistant to the head person, he says, quote, rejoice when your pastor is honored or promoted. He must increase, but I must decrease. And in another place, he says, always remind the congregation that you're not the head pastor. Learn to deflect praise. John the Baptist said, I'm not the Christ, but I am him sent before him. I'm sorry, it's hard for me to take these seriously, but tell me, like, what are your thoughts on this kind of teaching of towards the head pastor, he must increase, but I must decrease, and quoting John the Baptist, I'm not the Christ, but I'm sent before him, in the context of you're the servant deflecting praise to the head pastor. Tell me what it was like to work in that environment.
Oh, even as a student, that became a joke. Like I think if he knew the amount of basically the meme that it became, I think he would probably just stop teaching that. 'Cause it would be so funny. I mean, it could be something as silly as, "Hey, bro, nice, you got some nice shoes. I like those shoes." It'd be, "Oh, thanks, man. I got a good pastor." Like that was just the running joke, right? It was a joke. So I don't even know that very many people took it that seriously. Um, but it's just not surprising. Like I said, that whole system, it's its own tiny little convent, or it's just a place of supreme isolation. It's an echo chamber. It's a bubble, and I think he had really convinced himself that he was the head of this little system, right? And I don't think it was a hard transition for him to kind of use himself metaphorically as God or John the Baptist or some venerated saint. You know what I'm saying? Like that we should all just kind of bow down and worship and it's not even respect. Like he wasn't even after respect. He was after submission. Is really what it was. Submission is, if I could sum up his ministry in one word or his mission, it would be that submission in one word. um, there was this system, the system that they operate in. Um, I always thought of it like this: there's a difference in unity and uniformity, right? So unity obviously is a very scriptural concept. It's uh, it should be a way of life for the believer. We should walk in unity. However, we should not all be uniform, meaning we're not robots. Um, just because the lead pastor has a certain opinion on a secondary or tertiary or issue, um, they cannot abide even most minor disagreements because they take it as a threat to their authority, right? So the concept of unity is fine. I've never had a problem with that. It's uniformity, and I quickly looked around, not just FGBI, but the holiness movement in general. It's like everybody. You mean to tell me everybody believes exactly the same thing? I mean, to the letter. You know what I mean? Like the dot of the I and the crossing of the T. Like we all believe the same way. Like this is fishy. And there's scriptural examples of um, Paul and Barnabas during their missionary journeys. They kind of had this disagreement. They kind of each went their separate ways, and I don't necessarily believe, I'm not here to write a thesis on this, but it just bears mentioning that different personality types, we just don't agree on everything. We don't have to. That's not what's taught in Scripture, but that is what is taught in the Holiness movement and by Free Gospel is uniformity. Everybody, if you saw a group of people coming from a distance, um, you might not be able to tell who's who because they're all dressed the same, right? They all have the same suit and tie. They all have the same hairstyle. They all have the same dress length, hair length, sleeve length. Um, if you hear them talk about their theology, they would all say the same thing, you know, when it comes to Christology, when it comes to eschatology, when it comes to um, anything scriptural, they all believe the same thing. That's uniformity. And the reason that is because they can't tolerate a difference of opinion because it's seen as a threat to authority.
Yeah, that lines up exactly with what I see here in these notes. I found some of my notes from when I was a student there. So this is while you were there, because I think this was my junior year that this was all taught. But it talks about second level leadership, and it says these men are under authority when what the godly leader desires is always interpreted as a command. And then it goes on and says, notice the mindset of the second level leadership, which is the servants, the assistants. And he just quotes the verse. Whosoever he be that doth rebel against thy commandment, and will not hearken unto thy words in all thou commandest him, he shall be put to death. That was in the Sunday school notes while we were there.
Oh yeah, like I said, dispensationalists and their literal interpretation of scripture. Like I really believe he thought that literally.
It's crazy. It's crazy because this isn't referring to God. This is referring to Joshua, which is he interpreted that's him. He's Joshua. He's the man of God, and then quotes these verses about people should be put to death who don't do what he commands, which is just I don't know. I don't know why I didn't walk out. Like what was I was there, while this was taught.
It's hard to see when you're that involved. Being removed from it really gives you a different perspective, and you really realize, like, I think under the nose of it, like you're so sold out, and that's I mean that's what you're encouraged to be, is just sold out, under the guise of to God, right, or to the ministry. um, and really basically what you just become a slave. There's no autonomy, you don't have a voice, you don't have opinion, you're not supposed to think for yourself. And it's the same across the leadership side of it as well, right? Like you are there to support the administration's vision and what they believe is appropriate. And if you're I remember one time in particular, I was never one to make waves. To this day, I'm very anti-confrontational. I don't enjoy that type of stuff. Some people do. I really don't. Looking back, one of my biggest regrets is not having the courage to stand up more and to stand up for what was right. I remember one time I did kind of have enough. I believe it was like the last year that I was there. I could see just the workload that was being placed on the men specifically, just because they were the ones that I worked with a lot, right? I was there with for every work day. I had to hand them, their extra tasks and stuff like that. I was their teacher. I saw a lot of their grades were slipping. A good students, right? Like Dean's List level students were struggling academically and spiritually. I mean, I sat across the desk from grown men just crying, right? Just breaking down and crying because the workload was it was too unmanageable. And I sent a text, um, and this was a faculty like group chat. It was before the entirety of the faculty. I said some of the effect of, we're going to have to find a way to lighten this workload. I have a lot of the guys that are struggling academically and spiritually. We need to figure out a way to uh, basically draw some boundaries around that and bring it back towards away from an extreme. And I was told basically they will be fine. Don't bring this up again. And that was the end of it. I just said okay. And I think I facetiously put an LOL, like a LOL, okay, and then that was the end of the conversation. Um, so yeah, there was never an opinion. There was never a suggestion that you could make. You were only there to carry out orders without question.
Yeah. So tell me, what are some of the red flags and concerns that you had that ultimately ended up with you leaving? But what? So you mentioned just now, and that's terrible. I have seeing grown men breaking down, their grades slipping, because of this workload to the point of burnout. But was there anything else that was cause for concern for you?
Uh, yes. So not only was Figby kind of its own isolated world, um, there was isolation within the compound. There was almost this weird discouragement of intermingling, certainly with the students. That was very frowned upon, almost like a militaristic, like fear of fraternization, I believe is the term. Uh, and I have some theories as to why that was taking place. My teaching model was always the bulk of it was get elbow to elbow with my students and understand where they're living, what they're feeling, sympathize with them. Education is basically building a bridge. So you can talk all day long unless you've established some type of connection, usually outside the classroom with your student. They're going to listen to about 10% of what you say. So I saw the most success in my teaching career when I would build relationships, especially obviously with the men, almost exclusively with the men. Um, I mean, to the point that even some of my most difficult students, the disrespectful ones, the um, the ones that gave me the most trouble. When I took the time to connect with them on a relational level, they started showing a tremendous amount of respect. I mean, some of them are my best friends still to this day. Uh, so yeah, one of the red flags was just this isolation. Like it was almost discouraged to not uh, do stuff with the other faculty families. Like it was just this weird isolation where we were supposed to report for prayer, report for class, and then just be in our quarters, like hiding away from the world. And so it was like extreme loneliness, especially during the winter months. It's just, which was like 10 months out of the year in Pennsylvania, right? It was just brutal isolation. And that was a huge red flag. And really what led to, unfortunately, uh, for my wife was led to some of the hardest years of her life. Just the struggle that she had with her mental health, following all those years, because at least I got to get out and teach the students, right? So I was in the classroom, I was having interactions with the students. Sometimes, we would, I mean, I believe God would genuinely get in our conversations, right? He would minister to us and he would teach us things together. And, some good services from time to time or good chapels, and you just kind of feel refreshed spiritually. Uh, my wife was at home with, two young kids, just all by herself with no support, no village, no babysitter, no grandma visiting, anything like that. And so it just led her to this. I saw her change. Anybody that knew my wife, especially, when she was younger, I mean, she was just, she was a riot, like hilarious. Like she was just a ton of fun to be around. And to see her go from this bright eyed, just happy go lucky young lady into this solemn, drawn up. I mean, it's almost like I saw the light go out of her eyes, like a totally different person. And I knew then that this wasn't the environment where she, as a husband, I had to come to terms with the fact that my wife is not going to spiritually thrive or emotionally thrive in this environment. So obviously that was the reddest of flags, right? Um, yeah, just to name a few. Of course, there was the financial situation. I knew we weren't exactly setting up heaps for retirement. It was just there was a lot, but just to name a few.
Becky Pruitt has been talking about how Thomas Predick, the way he did leadership and trained faculty in loyalty, is by breaking people down and pushing them to their limits and even over their limits, and purposely trying to cause them burnout so they would break down. And then when they're at the point of mental and emotional exhaustion, then try to build them back up with flattery and praise and gifts and whatnot. And I know some people have like really raised an eyebrow and been like, are you crazy or are you really exaggerating? Well, she found an email that Thomas Predick sent her when she was faculty, and she's given me permission to share it, but it hasn't been shared publicly as of the time of this interview, so I don't believe you've seen it yet. So I'm going to show it to you, and then I just want your perspective if you ever saw anything like this. So it's Thomas Predick. Now, Becky, and she shared in her interview how she just had a group of students that were doing yearbook, and in the eyes of the expectations, they weren't doing enough. And so as faculty, she was told to campus them all so they would work harder. And so she campused them all. She felt horrible about it, tells Predick that she's done it. This is what he sends her back. This is probably the best email you've ever sent. Yelling, screaming, dancing, shouting, jumping, etc. This is leadership at its finest moment. Make it contagious. What helped you the most? I need to inject the other faculty members with it. Keep working on them, and then in giant red print. They will fall apart in a day or two, and you will have to put them back together. You're doing great. Remember to compliment them for all the hard work you forced them to do. So it's quite literally written proof of what Becky's been talking about, of working people to the extreme and causing them intentionally to fall apart. And then you get to put them back together and compliment them for the work they were forced to do. What's your thoughts on this? Did you ever see anything like this? Can you believe this?
Sadly, I can believe it. I might also add, you'll see the signature at the end says "looking forward to coming back." Now, I don't bet, but if I was a bet man, I would guarantee you this was sent from some vacation spot that they were at uh, during the time whenever he sent this email. Because so that was a pretty common denominator. Delegation in their mind was, here's all this stuff for you to do. I'm going to go do my thing. And yeah, I'll report back. And if it's not done perfectly, then you're going to get berated. So, anyway, yeah, I'm not surprised at all. That was there's like this psychological concept that I recently kind of, somebody put it into words that helped me understand it better. They were using it in the context of a more intimate relationship, but this poor lady was in basically an abusive relationship with her husband, whom she was able to safely get away from and rebuild her life and all that stuff. But there's a concept called love bombing that they would use basically when the abuser realizes that the victim is kind of pulling away and learning how to kind of like gain some autonomy and think for themselves and think a little clearly, create some space and separation, and think for themselves. The abuser will come in and just shower them. Like in this case, in a romantic relationship, it's like flowers, chocolates, dates, texting all hours of the day. They just shower you with all this affection, and it disorients the victim, right? They're like, oh well, maybe this is a good person, so I'm going to continue this relationship. And that's basically, it's a twisted version of what was going on here. It's the same concept, just a different relationship. Yeah, basically they would kind of just grind you to powder, and when you're feeling bad, just ready to quit, thinking that God doesn't love you and that you just don't deserve anything, then they would come in and offer you some type of accolades like this, or some little pat on the back, or an extra $50 on your paycheck or something, and you feel like, oh, they're my savior, thank God for them, and it was this really weird yo-yo psychological manipulation that took place. So yeah, I'm not surprised at all to see this,
Yeah, very
sadly.
unfortunate. So tell me about leaving. How did that go down? If there, I'm not sure if there was a breaking point or anything that you're like, this is the last straw. But then how did that go? And yeah, even how did you make it happen without being able to save up for rental truck and down payments and all this stuff? Tell me about leaving.
Um, Making the decision to leave was, on one hand, it was extremely difficult because I really, in a lot of ways, I didn't want to leave. Um, my goal coming into this was basically to, I already knew, and I talked to a couple different pastors who knew that Tom Paretic was going to be extremely difficult to work for. In fact, one of these pastors had was a former faculty member at the school. He was there around the time of the transition of power from the previous president to Thomas Paretic. The night that they decided that Tom Paretic was going to be the president of the school, um, he turned in his resignation. Like, he did it gracefully, right? And I think they served like another year or so. Um, but even way back then, 20 years ago, like, they already knew uh, that he was going to be difficult. So they knew that that was the reality. Um, and my goal going in was just to lay low, stay off of the Paretic's radar, um, and just do what I could. I knew I had a passion for my students. I had a passion to teach. I loved them. I loved teaching. I loved what it did for me. I felt like I loved what God did for others, I believe, through that. It was just, in some ways, Natalie, it was just a dream come true. I mean, to live in this little world where I got to, live with my little family, uh, study and pray every day, get closer to God. Um, uh, it was like a dream come true for me. I mean, there was just so many beautiful things that could have been. So I didn't want to leave because of those things. But on the other hand, it was easy to leave because I saw, number one, what it did to my wife, um, and I saw what it could potentially do to my children. So I didn't want my children raised under this legalism. I keep saying hyper fundamentalism, but it's basically legalism, right? That's what it is. So I knew that I didn't want my children living with this confusion and bondage. I wanted them to have a true understanding of the gospel. So those things made it easy for me to decide to leave. And we had beat the average, right? We were there 4 years total, which beat the average. So um, kind of proud of that, I guess, on one hand. And I just realized that it wasn't setting us up for a future. So um, as far as the plan to leave, there was no plan. It was just leave. Luckily, there was a church that we knew close by in Ohio that we just that, and my wife had family that lived there, so we kind of transitioned over there, and they were very good to us. They gave us a place to stay for a little while. It was in some ways the easiest decision, in some ways it was the hardest. And I made a comment on Facebook not long ago about something to the effect, and I genuinely mean it, that there's not a day that goes by that I don't mourn having to make that decision. And when I say mourn, I don't mean I break down and sob about it every day, right? It's like there's just a hint of sadness in me um, that I, through coercion and abuse and manipulation, uh, was basically forced to make a decision to step away from something that was a great love of mine, right? I felt like it was just my calling. I felt like I had a gift and a passion for it. And to just lay it down, yeah, just brings, even to this day. I mean, when you talk about something, a passion, I'm talking about something that, like, when you wake up in the morning, you're just like, as a general rule, just excited to be awake and alive. You know what I mean? Um, I've worked jobs where as soon as my eyes open, I'm like, I don't want to go to work at all. Like, there's nothing in me that wants to go. That was not the case. I mean, of course, everybody has bad days and there's seasons, but as a general rule, I mean, when my eyes opened, I was excited to be there and just teach and be a part of my students' lives. So it was so hard to make that decision to walk away. And leaving, there was no real plan, had a little bit of help. Um, thank God for that. Uh, this is where my story took a turn for the worse. You would think the worst would have been at Free Gospel, um, but I think that was the worst for me because I kind of knew what to expect. I knew it was going to be in some way, shape, or form terrible. Um, uh, so it's we used to have a saying. One of our teachers, actually, when I was a student, used to teach us to first thing in the morning, eat a frog, right? What? Like, what in the world does that mean? It basically means, like, chances are that's the worst thing you're going to do for the whole day, right? That's the first thing you do in the morning. So Figby was kind of like the proverbial frog, right? If you go ahead and just do that, that's the worst thing you'll ever have to do in your life. So, uh, yeah, for what that's worth. But so there was this expectation. I kind of knew that it was going to be rough. I didn't know what form it would take or how it would flesh out, but I knew that what was very difficult for me were the months that followed during my last year at the school. So I gave them a whole semester notice, which was a mistake. I told them at the end of the fall semester of 2018, I said, I'll be here for one more semester and consider that my resignation, just to give them time to prepare, to fill whatever empty spots, because the fact of the matter was they were struggling to find faculty. So even in spite of everything, I still tried to be gracious, uh, be Christ-like about the situation. Um, and that was one of the worst mistakes I could have made, honestly, was that semester notice, because that final semester that I was there was just, the isolation that I talked about earlier was just nothing compared to what we experienced that final semester. Um, and just the subliminal jabs from sermons and faculty meetings was just, it was nauseating, it was exhausting, it was discouraging. But all that, you know, was kind of to be expected. Leaving, however, during that last year, um, I had spoken in confidence to several. Holiness ministers, and every single one of them unanimously advised me to leave the school because they knew the situation. In fact, one of them had visited frequently during that last year and had saw with his own eyes uh, what was going on, and there was this facade that he had sympathized with me, and he was in my corner, and even if he couldn't necessarily do anything about the administration, he was going to support me and my family through our transition. Like, yeah, just hang on, it'll be okay. When you get out of there, there'll be places to preach, we'll take care of you. I've got this other friend, this preacher, who's going to help you guys. He said he knows how it is, and he knows how the paretics are, and so he's going to take care of you, and he's glad that you guys are leaving, and he's excited for your future opportunities. And so I had this expectation that I really wasn't afraid to leave, because I was like, well, I'm going to get taken care of. And I think it was a matter of just a week or two after we had left the school, um, which was hard. There was so much to process. Uh, so we hadn't even been through that. But then there was like this just silence, just crickets. I remember, just to paint the picture for what it was. There was actually, after graduation, there was like this week or 2 week long work week, where they wanted to do a bunch of renovations to the campus and all this stuff. So I was basically demanded, you will stay after graduation, even though you have resigned your position, the school year's over. Basically, it was demanded that I stay. I spoke with a couple different pastors about this, and both of them advised me, yes, stay, smile, work, and then just give them a smile and a creepy wave on the way out, like you're just the nicest person they've ever met. And I, for what they meant by that, I don't really know, other than just take your lumps and be the bigger person, which I did. I think I re-roofed, I re-shingled every single one of the trailers on the property, among other things. Worked sun up to sundown after I had turned in my resignation, under the assumption that these other pastors and preachers were going to receive me with open arms. And I'm here to tell you, like, that was not the case. In fact, no later than 2 weeks after we had left the school, there was just a giant rumor that my wife and I had both backslid and left church. And, they touched on their sacred cows. Like, my wife had cut her hair, that we were wearing wedding bands, which none of it was true. The one leg they did have to stand on was the church we went to. The pastor has no issues with facial hair, which I don't know why anybody would, but that's just one of their sacred cows. I guess Jesus wouldn't be allowed into their churches, but I digress. I had a little bit of we posted a picture on Facebook. And so I had a little bit of a 5 o'clock shadow, and it was just, the rumor mill just exploded. Like, everybody said they were, uh, nobody told us directly. I finally had somebody I had one guy call me directly to speak to me. And he said, yeah, everybody's praying for you. Everybody's talking about you. I'm like, well, that's good to know, because I don't really know what they're praying for us for, but that's good to know. Yeah, come to find out, we were backslid. I didn't even know it. So that was really where my world kind of came crashing down. Um, among other things, there's a whole nother situation. Maybe we can get into that here in a little bit without taking up too much more time. But yeah, I didn't really, I say it like this, I didn't really leave the holiness movement. I say the holiness movement left me. They just left us without a dime to our name. We didn't have a place to live, no home of our own. Obviously, I'd trained for vocational ministry, so it wasn't like I was going to go out and get a welding job, or um, become a lawyer. It was just, while some of my peers who weren't necessarily called to vocational ministry had spent years in trade school, establishing their careers. By this point, they were becoming the masters of their craft, right? Well, I uh, had to just step away from everything, and I had nothing to stand on. So that was an extremely difficult position for us to be in.
Yeah, so continue that story. Tell me more about what it was like trying to recover from that. I didn't realize quite how it played out, and that, yeah, you guys were just forced out of holiness. I'm kind of curious why, if you even know how that could happen or why that could happen. But yeah, I definitely love to hear, like, how did you get from there to here? What happened next?
Oh man, it has been a journey for sure. So um, just a lot of job hunting. Basically, took several jobs that were just to pay the bills, and just given my lack of training in any other vocation, um, I didn't have anything to fall back on. No experience, no resume. So basically, I mean, I've worked in factories, I worked construction. I just broke my back to do what was necessary. Um, it all kind of reached a breaking point um, a little over 3 years ago. Uh, just extreme identity crisis, financial crisis, um, crisis of faith. Like everything was just dying, right? Got to a really, really low place. But from there, kind of began to build back up, um, began to fast and pray about this one job opportunity, which I ended up with today. I had a friend at the church that we went to, knew I was looking for a better paying job. He says, "Hey, our fire department where he worked," he says, "We're getting ready to hire a new batch of recruits." So he said, "Yeah, if you apply, I'll put in a good word for you, and I think you do good." And long story short, got the job. 3 years later, I have a level 2 fire card, and I'm nationally registered paramedic. I worked a lot of 100-hour weeks between the full time job and school. So I basically had to go back to school. Um, so yeah, it's just been a journey, um, trying to heal from like the emotional, spiritual trauma while also working just a lot of hours. So it's been one thing I've had to do is just run my own race and find my own pace of healing. Um, it definitely hasn't been easy, even in the healthy church environment that I found myself in. Um, that was a frustrating process for myself and the people that tried to help me because basically it was just a lot. And I think there was a frustration when the healing process wasn't moving at the rate at which some people thought it should have. Um, uh, Other relationships were strained, and some of the resources, what little resources I did have available, were kind of withdrawn and put into other places for different seasons. And so, yeah, lots of loneliness is a word. Um, it's just messy. I'm not here to just complain or whine about it, just to paint the picture. And I'm sure there's other people out there that have been through, I mean, copy and paste, right? Like this is just a journey that you go through when you leave like legalism, when your whole identity is wrapped up and your person is wrapped up in that identity, like your affiliation with a group. It's basically like a poor Amish girl getting shunned by her community. You know what I mean? Like she loses her community, she loses her identity, she loses herself as a person and has to just start all over all by herself. I mean, that's the cost of a cult, right? And yeah, there's been no doubt plenty of people who've been through that process. That's just kind of the way ours took place. Was yeah, about 6 years of extreme isolation, loneliness, and learning to find God in this situation and just be honest with ourselves. And yeah, it's just been a journey. Still on the journey, right? But yeah.
I'm glad you shared about that because, yeah, when you said copy and paste, absolutely. And of course, I work for Berean Holiness, so we're hearing stories all the time. And one that's pretty common is actually the other day. Someone who's grew up in a mainstream church, doesn't really understand hyperfundamentalism, still learning about it, was saying So, women have all these dress standards, but for men, it's pretty easy to leave, right? And I almost laughed and I said, no, because for a lot of men, you guys were made to think that how you please God is through vocational ministry. And so you go to these unaccredited Bible colleges. So you have no college education, you have no trade school, you have no job experience. You just go right into these Bible schools and then into holiness, supposed to be holiness ministry. And it's copy and paste for different groups too. It's very similar. And then when you leave, yeah, you already mentioned it, the identity crisis. Who am I? Because you're not the holiness preacher anymore. And then your view of God, because how do you please God? Because that was how you please God, was you're called to be this preacher, this revivalist, this evangelist, going around with the fifth wheel or preaching at or teaching at a Bible school. And
Yeah,
then
there's only four ways to please God. There's only four. You have the pastor, youth pastor, missionary, or yeah, maybe just three.
yeah. So and then all of a sudden in their 30s, a lot of times is when it happens, not always, but in their 30s, I see people talking about or talking to us about what am I now, and then all this shame because they can't or they struggle to provide for their families because they have nothing to fall back on. And there's no, and like even if they went into ministry in another group, which isn't advisable if you're dealing with a lot of trauma yourself, it's usually just good to take just a break. But even if they could go to another group, the other group is like, wait, what did you come from? Like that sounds like a cult. Like what school? Where are your credentials from? Yeah, so that's a lot to overcome. And so if you have any more comments about the guys that are struggling through that, I'd love to hear them. And then any comments about how did this impact your view of God? That's what I was just mentioning. But because that was how you pleased God before. So how did you see God before, and how have you come to understand God now?
Those are really good questions, and I'm gonna type down just like two words for my responses because two things very quickly came to mind um, that I want to quickly move through. So to our guys, I have a passion for. I'm a man's man. I am super passionate about men being men, and I believe in their God given role. They're just such a gift. That's not to say that obviously that women and mothers are not. Um, uh, but I think there's been a lot over the last 50 years. I think church culture has been mostly kind of feminized, not necessarily in the sense of the feminist movement, but it's just a lot of church culture is very feminist, especially amongst evangelicals. Not necessarily independent holiness, your apostolics and stuff like that, but more of your evangelicals, non-denominational stuff like that. Our sanctuaries are cushy, our worship songs are frilly and just girly sounding, and it's just I'm not saying they're bad. I'm just saying I think the church world is finally kind of course correcting to allow space for men. I actually am involved with a men's ministry at my church, which has been tremendous. I work on the fire department, right? We're just dudes, just a bunch of dudes. It's a male dominated field, right? And I got three boys. I think that's really probably the foundation of my kind of biasness towards the masculine soul. Um, but to our guys, I want to tell you to use your gifts, not the gifts that they tell you that you're supposed to have, but the gifts that you actually have, because that is where the Bible talks about a gift making room for someone. That is really what will open the door. Now you have to have um, you still need God's help, to maintain and to see this through to the end, right? So there's a lot of challenges that you just need God to help you overcome. Um, but use your gifts. I tried for years to fit a square peg into a round hole. I tried to preach like everybody else. I tried to sing like everybody else, that uniformity concept. I beat my head against that brick wall, and it was really only in recent years that I discovered some of my other gifts. Um, you might see behind me here. I've got a couple little medals hanging up. These are for just kind of a little journey, a little side quest that I went on. I've done a few powerlifting meets. I've ran some half marathons, competed in CrossFit competitions. So I found like this love for fitness, and I really believe that was a gift of mine that opened the door for me to get the job that I have today. Right. Um, Being a firefighter is extremely challenging physically, not just the physical demands of the job. Right. We work 24-hour shifts at a minimum. Our sleep schedule is just non-existent. Our circadian rhythm is just gone. Um, in addition to that, I mean, the work itself, right? We wear 80 pounds worth of gear. We go into burning buildings, and there's just it's a lot of work, and it's not for the weak, right? Um, that's not to say that you're not a man if you're not like a firefighter or military or police. But that is to say that when I discovered some of these other gifts and I began to operate in them and develop them, yeah, it was those gifts that really opened the door for me to be able to step into this amazing world of now we have the income level that we need to live, amazing benefits, very super fulfilling job. I mean, it's adjacent to my passion for teaching. It's so fulfilling. We provide safety for our community. We help people. Um, the brotherhood that I feel amongst my fellow firemen. I mean, I have some really good friends that I work with. It's this tremendous world. I say all that to say, like, explore your gifts and allow God to develop them. That might not be in a pulpit. That might not be singing. That might not necessarily be teaching or, what is traditionally considered ministry. But your gift is where you will best serve the kingdom of God. And so that's what I would say um, to any listener, especially men. Just give yourself the soul space to discover those gifts. It might be, it might be more physical, like mine were. It might be more scholastic. It might be more mental, emotional. Maybe like they have a gift for just emotional intelligence and empathy and relatability. Uh, some skill, some craft, some discipline. Your gift is where you will best serve the kingdom of God, because your gift plus His anointing is just that's unstoppable.
And it's not worth any less. You're not any
Right.
less for
No.
serving God in another way.
Right. And that was, you say that you and I can sit here and say that, and I wish I could help people who might be struggling with that. Still, they're on the downhill side of it. I did not believe that for years. Like I could sit there and say that and recite that with you, like, oh yeah, it's just as important. God loves you just, but I didn't really believe it. Now I believe it, but it took a lot to get there. So kudos to those that are on that uphill journey, 'cause you will get there.
Yeah. So before we close, I want to know what was your understanding of the gospel back then before you disentangled, when you were still steeped in the hyperfundamentalism and the performance-based culture and working at FGBI and all this. What was your understanding of the gospel then versus how you understand God and salvation and serving him now, the gospel now?
Easy, very easy. Slave versus son. Um, so my understanding, whether I would not have admitted it publicly at the time, but my understanding of the gospel was you are a slave to this tremendous workload of earning your salvation, earning God's love, making sure that you check all the boxes to um, so that you don't just fall off into hell. Um, Basically, is the long and short of it. Uh, so think chains, bondage, uh, I don't think I would have called it that. I think the uh, pious version of me would have called it a cross to bear, but really it was just chains. Um, I mean, just the constant feeling of shame, um, that you will just never attain, and you better hope that by some miracle you make it to heaven. Maybe God's just generous on the day that you just so happen to leave this earth or pass away, and He might let you into heaven. But that was kind of my understanding of the gospel. Whereas now I understand that those that are in Christ are a new creature, right? Um, we are the sons and daughters of God, and that's what we were created to be. Obviously, there's just too much. It'd be so easy. I feel the need to qualify a bunch of stuff because I feel like people are just gonna latch on to this and be like, oh, that's just easy believism and that's just all inclusive gospel. That's not at all what I believe. I believe Jesus is the only way. By grace, we are saved through faith. It's a gift of God, right? Um, and that salvation is provided by His Son. So we're brought in, um, by the work of Christ, through the sonship of Christ. Like we are brought in with Him. That's my understanding of the gospel now. Is like it's not I'm not a slave, I'm a son. Even to the point where when I pray, sometimes I don't say Heavenly Father. I say Dad, and that's I've never even told anybody that. But the work that Christ has done and helped me to understand is that God is a father. Um, the biblical word is Abba, right? That was the Jewish term of endearment, Papa, right? Some people say Papa. In fact, one of my favorite Christian counselors and authors, that's how he prays, Papa. Hey, Papa, we're coming to you today, and it just shows this intimacy, this relationship. And it wasn't all that long ago that for one of the first times in my life, I remember I was driving my vehicle, a little SUV, driving down the road. I was actually pretty frustrated about something, but I'd been taught through some material that I've been reading through, to invite God into all of your emotions, the good ones and the bad ones, right? It's kind of been one of the keys to success in my healing journey. Uh, but I remember I was just frustrated, and I just kind of asked God to come and be with me in my frustration. And I said, you know, God, I feel okay. Like, I feel my humanity. I feel that I am prone to sin and to wander, and that I'm just dust and I'm flesh. But I feel okay, you know, and I know that your word is true, and that you will not just abandon me. You're not a fickle God. I'm your son. You are my father. And it's just been an incredible experience. And for those that have yet to experience that, that's how I'd summarize it. You're not a slave. You're a son or a daughter. That's the gospel.
Absolutely. And I feel like we can't close without me at least asking, how's Julie now? How's your family now? Just because you mentioned that you left in part because of how much they were suffering and isolated, and how are you guys now?
Oh, far from perfect, but man, we are working. Uh, all good things are worth working for, but we're finally in the place where we have the capability and the functionality to work towards. I would say some of our main goals and mission as a family was to have a healthy community. Um, one of the top was definitely to, because we understood the dangers of isolation and all the deficits that creates, all the problems that brings. So we've really been working the last several years on, obviously finding a balanced approach to the gospel. Uh, so we have a very healthy church, good core group of peers in that church that believe the gospel the right way. None of us are perfect, and we all, we rub each other wrong sometimes, and we're kind of learning to work through that, which has been another interesting part of the journey, is learning to abide with disagreements, right? or having like a disagreement or run in with somebody. And yeah, it might frustrate you, but that doesn't mean you have to like cut them off and go to another church and just like, like gang members or something. Like that's a novel concept. So we're learning to do that. I think community is teaching us to do that. Like I said, I made really good friends from other churches. They don't even go to my church. Some of them I work with, some of them I met through different places that I've been, but just good Christian people, good families. Some of them have kids that are our kids' age, and so it's just kind of blossoming. We're certainly still in the growth phase, right? I won't say we've like arrived and we're just like, oh yeah, we're so healed and we're happy all the time and we never have bad days, and that's like far from the truth. But it's like the foundation has been laid and like it's just blossoming into this beautiful thing. Just this beautiful life. I can't imagine for all that we've been through. I can't imagine, frankly, now that I have my wife and three beautiful boys, I would do it all over again just to have them, so it's life really is just beauty mixed with grief and hardship and tragedy. And that's just the reality of it, right? And that's not a bad thing at all because God's there through just the whole thing.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love that. And so as we close, I'm going to give you an opportunity to speak to two audiences. And the first one is the Holiness people that hopped on here, our old friends and colleagues in the Holiness movement who hopped on here, and maybe they're alumni or maybe they're pastors in the Holiness movement who have young people that they're considering sending to FGBI. And so they're curious about what former faculty are saying. And so they're listening. And just other people in the Holiness movement who, this is their school. This is kind of their flagship Bible school that's been there since 1958. And they've, like you mentioned, a lot of people were aware that there was a not good leadership model there, a lot of exploitation and spiritual manipulation, and this very authoritarian leadership style that the future of the Holiness movement is being trained in, and have chosen silence for 24 years. And so now I'm wondering, what would you say to them as someone who was one of them?
Yeah. To them, I would say, please, if just for a moment, stop the machine, is what I would say. Hold on, hit the pause button, right? Even I'm not saying they have to agree with everything that I say or share all of my opinions. Um, there are certainly those who won't. Um, but the fact of the matter is, um, Figby has been for the better part of a century just this giant machine, right? Is how I look at it. And one thing I know about the Holiness people is like they love their tradition and they love their sacred cows. They don't like questions. They just kind of want things to stay the way that they are. I think a lot of them love to relive the glory days of the inception of the school. Um, our our older pastors and ministers that have graduated 25 years ago, 30 years ago, they love to come back and just they get real nostalgic because they remember sometimes through rose-colored glasses what it was like for them there. And I would venture to say that it's not now what it was then. And I think if they would be honest with themselves and really remember back then, like there was quirks about it back then too. But basically, it's just a giant machine. And I remember one of the conversations I had with um, a former pastor of mine who is really more like a father to me. And this is really what created um, one of the biggest sticking points of my faith crisis was feeling abandoned by a spiritual father because I approached him about some situations and basically nothing was said, nothing was done, basically so the machine, the wheel could just keep on turning. And that just crushed me. It broke my heart. I'm not saying I had all the right reasons to feel that way or that I'm a perfect person or I had all the answers. Um, but the point remains, it's this giant system that's just been running this machine for the better part of a century, right? And at this point, it's like they're afraid to stop it. Well, if we stop, if we pull the plug, then we lose, right? It's like I think they're afraid that everything that's been done through the school will be invalidated if we take drastic measures that I think are necessary right now. So it's a big machine. I would beg them, even if just for a moment, like unplug the machine and just take a look at the parts. And I think you will see as much wounding, if not more, than help. And then do what you will with that.
Yeah. And we're going to close on this note. What would you say to the person who they went to FGBI or they worked at FGBI and they experienced some of that authoritarian abuse, burnout, being broken down, just getting to the end of the rope and feeling like no one cared and just running to the ground, and they've left broken, in crisis, identity crisis, financial crisis, spiritual crisis. Basically, they are where you were. What would you say to them?
Oh my goodness. Um, I'm really just, I wish I could put into words how I felt going through that process. Like, I know if you're in that process, you feel utterly alone. Um, like I said, it was a difficult situation. A lot of this really impacted the way that I viewed God um, as a father. Uh, so, not to get back into it because we're trying to close this, but I was basically abandoned by my birth father. Um, I had a this situation here where I felt like my spiritual father had abandoned me, and so I went into a season of my life believing that my heavenly father had abandoned me. And it was really difficult to reconcile how I was feeling with the truth. Um, and so I think that's really what gives some potency to, the manner in which I pray now, that God is my father, to call him Papa and Dad in a way that's loving and trusting and intimate. I'm telling you that I never thought I would ever. Jesus, I had no problem with Jesus, right? He's my savior. He's the guy who heals people and sits children on his lap and all that kind of. I had no problem with Jesus, but God is a father. I could not reconcile that with any type of reality. I would not really have believed that. And so, yeah, if you're there, that's that's the truth. I would just advise you every day, as far away as you feel from the truth, just keep reading it, right? Keep reading the word and trusting in the truth of God, and he will bring you through it. Much like, David in the cave of Adullam, right? Like, he was anointed king, and then, like years and years later, finally sat on the throne, right? So it's like, what the heck? Like, I thought I was supposed to be king, and I got, Saul's throwing spears at me, and people are hunting for me. I'm sleeping in the mud. And that had to be an extremely difficult and confusing time for David, but eventually, God brought him to the throne, and he ushered in just such a successful age for the history of Israel and all that stuff. So I would say time, just, it's a soul's pace. You're not going to pop it in a microwave and have it done 2 minutes later. You're not going to hit your internet search bar and have a result in zero point 0.3 seconds. It's going to take time. I mean, time is really where it's all at, and that will be different for everybody. Um, and it's not easy, but you are okay. Like, God has you. You are okay, and you're gonna make it through this.
With that, thank you so much for this conversation and for talking to me today.
Yeah, glad to. Like I said, I like to talk. This has went a little longer than I intended, but yeah, good to be in touch with you. Thank you for what you're doing with Berean Holiness. Um, what you guys are doing, just don't quit. And yeah, who knows? I hope this conversation will just bless somebody else, help somebody.